Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really pivotal moment in American history. We're going to look at how the U.S. government's handling of the John F. Kennedy assassination inadvertently birthed the ultimate crisis of public trust. We're talking about a panicked rush to control a narrative that ended up creating this massive, enduring information vacuum. And that vacuum, it fundamentally damaged the American public's faith in their own institutions. So let's just dive right into it.
Now, this is really fascinating. The very day after the assassination, a memo is sent to the White House with some incredibly wise advice. It basically said, release as much information as possible to the public so as to avoid public speculation. The Deputy Attorney General hit the nail on the head, right? He clearly understood that total transparency was literally the only way to prevent paranoia. But as you're going to see, this advice was completely, 100% ignored.
Instead of transparency, the government decided to go with narrative control. So the big question we have to ask ourselves as we go through this explainer is how exactly did the government's own defensive actions, their desperate desire to just keep the public calm, how did that end up fertilizing the ground for the most famous conspiracy theories of our modern era?
That brings us to Section 1, the assassination in Dallas.
Okay, so the events on the ground in Texas unfolded with just chaotic, terrifying speed. On November 22, 1963, at 12:30 p.m., the president is assassinated. Less than 2 hours later, they arrest Lee Harvey Oswald, a 24-year-old former Marine with a very unusual background. But then, just 2 days later, Oswald is shot dead by a nightclub owner named Jack Ruby right in front of the police, and this specific crazy event tragically guaranteed that there would never be a public trial to transparently establish the actual facts.
And right before he was silenced, Oswald famously declared, "I'm just a patsy," which is basically an old-school term for a fall guy. For a grieving public watching all of this unfold live on television, this instantly planted the seeds of profound doubt. I mean, they were promised a trial where all the evidence could be thoroughly examined, but instead, they got a murdered suspect.
Moving on to Section 2, a rushed official story.
So with Oswald dead, government investigators, primarily the FBI, suddenly had total control over the narrative. And before a real, comprehensive investigation could even get off the ground, newly released audio recordings show that FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover definitively decided Oswald was the lone gunman. In just the hours and days following the tragedy, Hoover locked into this singular explanation, no room for debate.
Meanwhile, the new president, Lyndon B. Johnson, was deeply worried about national panic. To prevent what he called a three-ring circus of independent probes and rampant speculation, LBJ essentially used the FBI's predetermined conclusion to box in the official inquiry. He desperately wanted a single, unified story just to keep the nation calm. To pull this off, LBJ formed the Warren Commission, and he gave them just 10 short months to investigate. But take a really close look at who was actually on this panel. You'll notice Allen Dulles. Dulles was the former director of the CIA, a man JFK had recently fired after the Bay of Pigs disaster. So putting a disgruntled former CIA director on the very commission investigating the president's death, that did absolutely nothing to instill long-term public trust. Now, the Warren Commission was bound by the FBI's initial findings, which included finding only 3 empty shells on the 6th floor of the book depository. But here's the problem. They had a total of 7 wounds across JFK and Governor Connally to account for. So to make the math work, the commission had to endorse this frankly unbelievable magic bullet theory. This theory required one single bullet to cause severe damage across 2 different bodies and emerge looking practically pristine. This defied common sense for so many people, including Governor Connally himself, and it became a massive source of public skepticism. Let's look at Section 3, why the government hid facts.
This brings us to a pivotal shift in our explainer, understanding the hidden motives. Because think about it, if there was nothing to hide, why did the FBI and the Warren Commission aggressively suppress conflicting evidence? Why hijack the narrative? Why totally ignore that early advice to just release all the facts?
Well, the real context here is geopolitical damage control. You have to remember, in 1963, America was deep in the heart of the Cold War. If the public believed this was a coordinated plot by the Soviet Union or Cuba, the immense pressure to retaliate could have literally sparked a nuclear apocalypse. On top of that, the CIA was desperately trying to hide their own highly secret, completely illegal plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. So they manipulated the investigation to protect national security and institutional secrets, completely failing to realize they were sacrificing domestic trust to do it. And that leads us to Section 4, the public loses faith.
You see, trying to manage the truth from the top down always leaves a trail, and as people started doing the math, the public definitely started to catch on. When citizens eventually juxtaposed what the initial Parkland Hospital doctors saw versus the heavily modified official autopsy, the perception of a massive institutional lie became impossible to ignore. The Dallas doctors reported neck and chest wounds that looked like entry wounds from the front, which totally contradicts the shooter from behind. Yet, the official autopsy recorded wounds from the back, records were modified, and, shockingly, JFK's brain went entirely missing from the archives. I mean, you literally can't make this stuff up. You also have to look at the historical backdrop here. This cherry-picked JFK narrative was clashing with reality at the exact same time the American public was experiencing these massive, widespread betrayals from the government. In 1975, the famous Zapruder film finally aired on national TV, providing visual evidence that really seemed to contradict the official story. At the exact same time, citizens are learning about secret CIA coups, they're enduring the endless trauma of the Vietnam War, watching Watergate unfold, mourning MLK Jr., the government simply hadn't earned the benefit of the doubt anymore. So under immense public pressure, Congress finally did a real, earnest investigation in the late 1970s. And shockingly, they actually concluded there was a high probability of a conspiracy and 2 gunmen. But even more importantly for our focus on public trust today, this committee officially called out the FBI and CIA for withholding information. One FBI agent even testified that his superiors ordered him to physically destroy a letter written by Oswald. Let that sink in for a second.
Which brings us to Section 5, the legacy of distrust.
Because the government left this gaping information vacuum, pop culture eventually filled it. The 1991 movie JFK presented a massive government conspiracy, and it struck a huge chord with a highly skeptical public. The resulting outrage finally forced the government's hand, leading Congress to pass a 1992 law that mandated the release of all hidden assassination archives by a strict deadline of October 2017.
5 million. Let that number wash over you. That is the staggering number of documents the government had kept hidden, eventually releasing them to the public leading up to that 2017 deadline. That is just an astronomical amount of paperwork to keep secret. Now, what did this absolute mountain of evidence actually reveal? Well, the tragic irony is this. There was no smoking gun proving a grand assassination conspiracy or a second shooter. Instead, the documents proved the Secret Service intentionally destroyed motorcade surveillance tapes. They proved a key CIA officer's investigation records had vanished without a trace. Basically, they proved that while the murder itself may not have been a grand conspiracy, the government's cover-up of their own mistakes and secrets was absolutely 100% real. By treating the public like children who couldn't handle the complex, messy truth back in 1963, the government permanently fertilized the ground for modern conspiracy theories. The moment that investigation turned into an effort to stifle information just to fit a unified narrative, it created a permanent cesspool of speculation that has haunted American politics ever since. So, we'll leave you with this final thought. The story of the JFK assassination isn't just a true crime mystery. It's a literal masterclass in how institutional trust fails. When a democracy feels justified in lying to its own people, no matter how noble their intentions regarding national security might be, the real casualty isn't just the facts. The real casualty is the very fabric of public trust that holds the entire democratic system together. Once that trust is gone, how do you ever get it back?